Hey everyone. So in this video I am going to be installing the BL Touch auto bed leveling sensor on the Artillery Genius. To install the BL Touch, the first step is going to be removing this blue cover from the extruder, and that will give us access to a PCB that's underneath it, which already has the pins where you can directly plug in the BL Touch. And that's the nice thing about this machine, that they've already made provisions so that you can easily upgrade with an auto bed leveling sensor. For the BL Touch, the pins match exactly, so it's going to be plug and play. You will need a few printed parts for this upgrade, so before you start and open up your machine, you should print those out. I will leave a link to those in the description. You will also need a few different bolt sizes to put everything back together. I will also include that in the video description, the details of the different bolt sizes you need. Now that I've removed the cover, let's look at the pins, the auto bed leveling pins that I talked about. So they're the ones on the top right of this board, and they're also labeled so that you can easily connect them. And as you can see, they've already written BL Touch, so you know which what the pins are for. So the next step is going to be removing that part cooling fan, because that's where we are behind the part cooling fan is where we are going to attach the mount for the BL Touch. And once you remove two of these screws, you will need slightly longer ones to attach it back, because the part adds a bit of thickness, and then these screws don't screw in all the way. So I'll be leaving the exact screw sizes you will need in the description. This is the mount part that we printed beforehand, and I printed this in PETG because this is pretty close to the the hot end, so I didn't want to take a chance with PLA. And there's two versions that you can use for this mount. This is the first one that I'm showing you, which again linked in the description, and this has an additional improved fan shroud, which should improve airflow to the plastic as it's being laid out, and throw air all around the nozzle, whereas the original fan shroud only throws air from the front. If you're using this one, you will need to remove the existing fan shroud, which is glued to the fan. It might need a bit of force to remove, and then you can just sort of friction fit it into this new mount and fan shroud, like you can see me doing here. If you go with the other option, which is a very simple mount that comes with the Waxter BL mod, and the model files are again linked, and they're a part of the zip file that you download for the firmware from the Waxter BL mod site. You won't need to remove the existing fan shroud, and that mount will just attach behind the fan, and that should be it. But except for the fan shroud, the shape of that mount and this one is practically the same. So you will need two M320s to fix the fan and the mount. The fan originally attaches with M316s, which are too short, so you should have two M320s on hand. And to attach the BL Touch itself to this mount, you will need a single M310 bolt. So the BL Touch comes with two screws as part of the package. those screws are used to attach the BL Touch to a small printed piece, which I will show you in a few seconds. And once the BL Touch is attached to that piece then sort of attaches here with the M310. And so this was the piece, and you use these two screws to attach the BL Touch to it, and you have to make sure that you have a tight fit so that there is no play in there. Otherwise the Z-homing will not be accurate. And then you can use the M310 to attach this BL Touch and the mount to this entire assembly. One thing which I forgot to do before attaching this mount behind the fan was to insert a nut on the back side. There's a groove where you can insert a nut, an M3 nut. So I had some trouble and I had to use this pair of pliers to sort of position it and then insert it back there. And yeah, but if you've done that before you attach the whole mount to the fan, you should be good. And so you can now see me just attaching that BL Touch mount to this entire assembly. And you don't want to tighten it too much at this point, because you're still going to want to adjust it up and down a bit. So that piece that attaches directly to the BL Touch, when it mounts onto this other mount that we've created, when it allows you to slide it up and down a couple of centimeters, so that you can adjust the height of the BL Touch, as you can see me doing here. And that's what we're going to do next. So this is the third printed piece. This is sort of like a calibration helper, and this is the height you want the BL Touch to be from the bed. So you should manually move the Z-axis down to basically almost 0, where you want 0 to be. And the good thing about the Artillery Genius is it has that timing belt that attaches both of the Z-axis together, so you can move the entire thing by just moving one of the lead screws instead of having to try and synchronize both of them by hand. And yeah, so just move it to so try and move the nozzle to where you think it should go, which is basically your a rough level, and then put that small piece below the BL Touch and then adjust the BL Touch so that in its so when the pin is retracted, it is touching the top of that small piece. Now that we've attached the BL Touch to the printer, the final step is going to be connecting the wires, and that's pretty straightforward, as you'll see in a couple of seconds. The PCB on the hot end already has all of the pins you need, so you just basically connect the wires that come with the BL Touch to these pins, and you can see the order which is also written there. So white, black, yellow, red and brown, and so the BL Touch that I got came with the cable that on one end attaches to the BL Touch, and on the other end has these connectors which you can just plug in here, and that's going to be it basically. And that is essentially it for the installation part. The final step is going to be putting the cover back, this plastic cover, and reattaching the ribbon cable, and then we will move on to the firmware installation, where we have to update the firmware for both the main board and the touch screen. So one thing which I'd like to talk about here is this firmware that I found on Thingiverse. Now this is firmware for both the mainboard and the touchscreen, and uh, the reason I'm talking about this here is one of the features that's listed in this firmware is that you're able to disconnect the touchscreen from the main board of the printer just by going into a setting on the touchscreen itself. And that's important because as it's set up, you can't flash the main control board of the printer of the Artillery Genius without having to physically disconnect the touchscreen from the main board. And to do that, you have to open the panel on the bottom side, on the bottom of the printer. And this firmware, one of the features it listed was the ability to disconnect, in software, and then flash the main board without having to physically disconnect it. And I really wanted to try it out, so I spent around 30 minutes or more, but unfortunately I could not get it to work. Maybe I was doing something wrong, or maybe this just doesn't work anymore, or for some reason, whatever, I wasn't able to get it working. But I did give it I did spend about 30 minutes on it. But even though the disconnect option did show up, I was unable to update the mainboard firmware, flash it without disconnecting the actual physical cable. And I just wanted to mention that, so in case you find this as well, and if you're able to make it work, please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what I got wrong. But just a heads up that for me this did not work. And so as you'll see next, I'm going to go ahead and open up the printer itself, the bottom plate, and then remove the cable physically before flashing it. You can open the bottom panel by basically removing 6 screws. And but one thing to note is, at least my printer came with a sticker that says warranty void if removed. I'm personally okay with that, but just a heads up, like if you want to make sure that you don't get any trouble using the warranty, then maybe you won't be able to do this upgrade. And one more thing is, you should remove the back cover a bit carefully, because the exhaust fan at the bottom is attached to a cable that's shorter than what would allow you to place the cover on the table. So if I were to let it go, it would actually pull the cable in. So you would want to disconnect that first before you move the backplate somewhere else. And once that's done, this white connector, couple like 6-7 cables or whatever, this is the one that connects the touchscreen to the main board. Now it's glued in. They've used hot glue, so you're going to have to apply some force to it. Just be careful that you don't bend the pins. One more thing you could do is you could use something like an X-Acto knife and just cut off the glue and then remove it. But in any case, it's not that difficult. You can sort of wiggle it free and remove that. And once that's done, you should be good to flash the main board. And the main board is the one at the bottom of the what you saw at the bottom of the printer. The next step is going to be connecting the printer with a USB cable to your computer. And then I used Prusa Slicer. You can use some other software if you want. You can use the Arduino IDE if you're compiling your own firmware. I personally just used the firmware that I got. It's as part of the Waxter BL Touch mod, and again, that's linked in the video description. So I just use that, and once the printer is connected, you can use Prusa Slicer to basically flash the new firmware onto the main board. So now that the main board has been flashed, the next step is to reconnect the touch screen, and then you can put the printer back together and you can screw in the bottom plate, and then we are going to have to update the touchscreen firmware. And the one I liked, decided to use, was this raw TFT firmware. It has some good reviews, so and I read some good things about it. So you can basically go to the, again, linked in the description for video description, but you can go to this repository, download one of the releases, and it should be a zip file, and inside that zip file, in a couple of folders, you'll see these files, two files and like two folders, and you want to copy those onto the SD card which you are going to use with your printer. And one thing I found was that the printer does not update the firmware if the SD card you're using is more than 8 GBs. So if you have an SD card that's more than 8 GBs, you don't need to actually go out and buy a new one. What you can do is you can use the disk utility in Windows to remove all partitions from that first, and then just create a new 8 GB partition on the SD card, and that is what worked for me. This is basically a 16 or 32 GB SD card that I'm using, but with an 8 GB partition so that the printer accepts it. So yeah, you just insert the SD card in the SD card slot, and then you power the printer on, and at that point the touch screen will find that the update files are in the SD card, and it will update itself. It takes a couple of minutes, and once that's done, you're basically we're almost there. I mean, just a few last few things, few adjustments that you might need or you might not. So the first thing you should do is go through the menus on the printer and on the touch screen, and so it should be in the motion section. There should be a section called ABL, auto bed leveling. Inside of that you'll find a button to initiate auto bed leveling, and that's what is happening here, as you can see. So this is the printer homing itself, and now it's doing the auto bed level. So once that you know the firmware upgrades have worked correctly and the printer does initiate and finish the auto bed leveling routine, all of that part is now, we're confident that it's done. The next part is making the final adjustments, so bringing the nozzle close enough to the bed to get a good first layer adhesion, and you do that with so if you go to the movement menu on the touch screen, and then inside there's an auto bed level sub menu, and inside that there's another sub menu called baby stepping. So what you do is you home your z-axis, you move your z-axis down to 0, and then you use that you put that piece of paper, slide that piece of paper below the between the nozzle and the print bed, and then you baby step down, which essentially moves the nozzle a bit closer to the bed until you have a good first layer height, which you can test by sliding the piece of paper until you feel some drag on it from the nozzle. In my case, what happened was the BL touch was a bit too low, which means that the nozzle would be way too high for the baby stepping to be able to compensate for it. And so what I did was I loosened up the screw a bit and then moved the BL touch a few millimeters up, and then tightened it again in that position. And after that, when I did the baby stepping routine, I was able to bring the nozzle down to what I think is a good first layer height. So once you're done with the baby stepping, you go back to the previous menu, and then there's a Z offset sub menu. You should go into that, and then there's a save option, and you should save that. And what that does is it then saves into the mainboard memory the Z offset, which is basically the difference between the end of the tip of the nozzle and the tip of the BL touch. And from that point on, whenever the printer auto does the auto bed leveling measurements, it knows how close to the bed the nozzle should be when it's printing. And yeah, so once I did that, the next step for me was printing a test print. And yeah, let's see how that went. So for the test print, what I did was I opened up Prusa Slicer and added a shape, which you can do by right clicking add shape. I added a box, and I changed the width and length to cover more than 50% of the bed, and the height I set to be equal to the first layer height that I have in my print settings, so that only one layer of material will be laid down. And so as the printer is printing this, what you can do is there's a baby stepping menu on that's displayed while the printer is printing this file, and you can use that to make small adjustments to the nozzle and adjust it even more precisely while it's printing, so you can see the effects in real time and set the nozzle height to something that you like. And yeah, so with that, that's basically it. And yeah, so I did this upgrade almost a week ago, and since then I've printed quite a lot of models, things I needed around the home, stuff like that, on the Artillery Genius, and I haven't had any trouble with it so far. One thing to note is this test model, you'll need to print it off of the USB, so you need to copy it into the USB and then plug the USB in the printer. You can't print it by connecting your printer to the computer, because otherwise you won't see that baby stepping menu. So yeah, that's it. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions about this process, please do let me know in the comments. And yeah, if you have any suggestions on what videos I should make next and what you would like to see, please do leave those as a comment as well. Thank you for watching.